Today we're going to talk about the Jester and all the things he can bring to your lineup. Just a couple of things I want to go over. The Jester is an excellent support position. He can also offer very good burst damage with the Finale ability. He can also do support damage via bleeding, which are his pretty viable options when he's not supporting your party. Some of my personal thoughts on the Jester: I think he's an absolute to have at least 2 Jesters in your lineup. Some of the things he can offer are just too invaluable, such as ranging from stress heals to Ballad of buffing up your accuracy, your speed, and your critical chances, and also offering, as I said, some decent damage and potentially a high dodge character that can mark himself and take a lot of attacks, but not get hit because he can avoid a lot of them. We're going to read a quick thing on the Jester so you can understand more about him. Combat is a power ballad, a slow build-up, and a grand finale. On the offense, the Jester leaps to and fro in a bloody cacophony, positioning himself for a glorious end in the front ranks. Alternatively, he can hang back, delivering chilling melodies and unsettling riffs that terrorize his foes and give strength to his allies. Once again, these descriptions so far for the first 3 characters I reviewed are pretty spot on what the character generally does in the lineup. He can be a guy who goes to the front row, as I said, and do massive damage. He can also be the guy who sits comfortably in the 3rd or even 4th position for the entire dungeon and fight. Dirk Stab. Before I go into a lot of the abilities of the Jester, we're going to say every ability has a finale buff, and sometimes that's important depending on if you're going to go for a finale damaged lineup. Dirk Stab's an ability I often find myself not doing. And the reason why I don't find myself doing Dirk Stab is the Jester's not very strong, and you're about to see that when I show the Jester's base damage. His base damage is 7 to 13, that of an Occultist, but the Occultist at least got additional damage against Eldritch. We're not so fortunate to do that with the Jester. The critical modifier is pretty good. The accuracy of 105 isn't great for 7 to 13 damage. The bypassing guard is decent. However, if you have the Shield Breaker DLC, you can remove the guard of said individual. Also, even if you do go through the guard, the damage of the Jester is probably not going to be worth it. So doing a stun on the person guarding is actually probably a better choice than it is not to. So as I said, my final opinion, Dirk Stab, the best thing it can probably do is move you forward 1 to set you up for an ally if that's what you choose for it to be. Harvest. Harvest with 110 accuracy, the minus 50% damage, once again, it's really not that bad because the Jester's not doing that much damage. The 4 bleed on positions 2 and 3 is the big thing we look at, because 140% base chance to potentially add 8 bleed to the enemy opposition is really strong, and depending on the dungeon I'm walking to, if I'm going to do a regular dungeon run where I'm not going to fight a boss, I do Harvest because I get to hit 2 positions and add bleed. If I'm going to fight a boss where I know there's bigger enemies, I go to Slice It Off because it does more damage and more bleed, but obviously you only hit positions 2 or 3. Harvest kind of combines them together, and I think Harvest is really good for certain dungeons. Once again, the finale buff of 30% damage is about the norm for most of the abilities, as you're probably going to see. Another thing to mention is it's in position 2 and 3, which is where Slice It Off is, and then a couple of other abilities we'll talk about function out at 3 and 4. So I think the sweet spot for a Jester is often position 3, and you're going to see why as we progress through his skills. Finale. Accuracy base of 160, which means you're probably never gonna miss. A damage modifier of 50% already and a critical modifier of 9%. So let's just look at what that means for just Finale if that's the first ability you're gonna use. So the critical chance base is 8%, which isn't that high for the weapon, and then if you add that to Finale, which I believe was 9%, you're looking at 17%. Yes, you're looking at 17%. And then the damage would feasibly go to about 11 to 19 to 20. So you're looking at 11 to 20 if you just use it first, which really isn't all that great. That's about a standard attack, but obviously that's not the point of Finale. So I'm going to kind of peek all the other skills to show you what Finale will eventually do. Using one instance of Dirk Stab would get you a 30% Finale increase in damage for up to 8 rounds. Therefore, you can get about 6 to 7 rounds of mixing and matching abilities to make Finale as strong as possible. You can use it before those amount of rounds, as I said in the beginning. So Dirk Stab was 30%, Harvest 30%. We'll eventually get to Solo, where it's 75 and 8% Finale critical. You'll get to 30% on Slice It Off. You get to 30% and 8 critical on Battle Ballad. And you get to 30% damage and 8 critical on Inspiring Tune, which means these abilities are much stronger because of those plus 8% critical. Obviously, Solo being the highest damage increase and the same critical increase as Battle Ballad and Inspiring Tune. I've also used Finale as a setup, so I'll sometimes, if I plan on using Finale, not like a back pocket ace card, which I usually play it, but if I plan on using it, I'll maybe take off Inspiring Tune or Battle Ballad. I'm not sure which one, depends on the dungeon. Then I'll probably keep on Solo, Finale, and maybe like Slice It Off, something like that, those 4. So when I'm ready, I solo forward from the 3rd position, which we'll get to, but I'll show it now. Solo from 3rd to the front to get that last big damage increase, and then next turn I essentially drop the hammer. This critical can be rather massive depending on how many turns have passed, and also depending on the abilities you have used. Another great thing about Finale is if your party gets shuffled, it moves him back 3, which means you can really help other people who can't move well essentially get pushed to the front faster. And also, depending on the skills you have on the Jester, moving back to the 4th position might be where he accelerates best at, or excels best at. So I often keep Finale on just in case he gets pulled or someone gets pushed. I can essentially take 1 turn, correct my whole party while doing a decent amount of damage to whoever did the pulling or pushing. If so, it's like a cultist witch, you can probably one-shot her, in all honesty. So it's a really nice ability to do good damage and get your party back into where it should be. Obviously, an ability this powerful can only be used once per battle, and it does do minus 25 dodge, minus 3 speed, and 100% increased stress. I really don't recommend doing this unless you know the fight's coming to an end, or you absolutely need to, and you know that the Jester is not going to be hit too often, because those are some pretty horrible debuffs to put on yourself. Solo. Solo is pretty much I'll call it the foreplay to Finale. You don't need to worry about hitting the enemy, because all it's going to do is mark yourself, add 30 dodge to yourself, which is so much dodge. You're going to get 75% damage and 8% to Finale. As I said, this is often like an ability I'll use maybe after a turn or 2 of Battle Ballad. And then on top of that, because at that point my damage increases like 250 to 300%. I get about an additional 16-24 critical chance, which puts it at like 40% critical and possibly, I don't even know, I'm going to throw numbers out there, maybe 30 to 40 damage on the higher end, and that's probably lowballing. So if you get a critical on that, you can be looking at like a 65 critical, which will kill most things. Another time I've used Solo to great extent is actually against the Drowned Crew. Because the Drowned Crew hits whoever's in front with the anchor, if you do this and have other high dodge trinkets on the Jester himself, you can really get him to about 80 to 100 dodge. I have a video on the Drowned Crew if you want to look that up. I do the Jester strategy because I pretty much reduce the RNG chance to I think like 5 or 7%. And then I actually do put on Dirk Stab, which I kind of crapped on earlier. And then I'll just eventually Finale once I feel like the Drowned Crew is right around that sweet spot where you can do about a sweet 70 to 80 critical maybe. But Solo is definitely something you should put on if you plan on going dodge heavy, or if you plan on using Finality once or twice throughout a dungeon run. Slice Off. So Slice Off is that other ability like Harvest, but its accuracy is higher, its damage modification is slightly lower. It's also got a much higher crit modifier than Harvest. As I said, this is definitely the single target ability you're going to do, because it also does 5 points of bleed in 3 turns, so it does 3 more bleed damage than Harvest does. But it does add the same amount of Finale damage. This is really preference if you like Harvest over Slice It Off, because as I said, Slice It Off can get a much higher critical strike chance, which also adds more bleed over more turns. But if you're really interested in bursting down the 2 and 3rd position in your lineup, I would highly recommend Harvest, and I do actually switch between these 2 skills quite often. I don't have a favorite out of the 2 because they both work in excellent situational awareness. Battle Ballad. Battle Ballad is probably like the skill I love the Jester for. Don't get me wrong, Inspiring Tune is boss, but we're going to look at Battle Ballad and maybe why you can see this is probably one of his best abilities. It is only used in position 3 and 4, but the 4 speed, 10 accuracy, and 6 critical. That is disturbing. This lasts for 4 rounds, and I don't care which character you're using. More speed, more accuracy, more critical is pretty much good on everybody. Maybe the only characters you don't want to do this on are people who are going to do DOT heavy abilities that don't do a lot of damage. And the reason for that is I would argue, I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm willing to bet DOT abilities usually have higher accuracy and usually less damage. But you could also add, getting a critical on that does add 2 more turns, so you can add a lot. That could be really good for some bosses, but I feel like in general fights, you don't need a lot of criticals on your DOT abilities. But this synergizes so well with like Crusaders, Highwaymen, Shield Breakers. I mean, even like Man-at-Arms. It's just ridiculous the amount of people this just synergizes with. Anyone who does just raw physical damage just gets amplified by this. I mean, Hellions. I mean, it's such good choices. Even Houndmasters, if you're just going to do Hound's Rush, really benefit from more accuracy and critical strike. It's absolutely gross. Also, going first will allow you to target the enemy lineup where you're weak at, and I will explain that. If you didn't bring along a lot of heals, it allows you opportunities to really bring down the heavy damage dealers first and maybe leave the stress damage dealers in the back. Vice versa, now it's kind of funny to say you should have good stress healing if you have a Jester, but if for some reason you don't put Inspiring Tune on, you can use your turns to take care of the stress damage dealers so you don't have to worry about stress coming in. Ballad's an amazing ability, adds 30% damage and 8 critical as we said before to Finale. So if you use this 3 to 4 times, man do you have damage and crit stacked up on Finale. Inspiring Tune. Inspiring Tune is just another wonderful ability, and it gets even better with the DLC because I believe there's a district that adds even more stress heals to him, and then there's a lot of trinkets that increase his stress related abilities as well. Therefore, that minus 12 UC could actually easily be 17 to 19, which is just phenomenal. That's almost 20. And you figure that's a fifth of an affliction status, so he can pretty much do this twice and heal most people if they've received stress. And then on top of that, if they're a target that chronically gets hit by stress damage, that's okay. You get minus 20% stress as a buff of that. So if you use this twice, not only is the stress coming in lowered, you're still doing that 17 to 19 potentially, which means you're going to eventually overwhelm the stress coming in. And there's no RNG to it. It's not like a 74-79% chance like there is on Flare and the Houndmaster's ability, Cry Havoc, I believe. This is just raw, remove stress, and this is why he's such a great early game character, because he is a surefire way to keep your people out of affliction statuses early on. Just to go over the cons and pros of the Jester again. I somewhat alluded to them at the beginning of the video, but I want to talk about them at the end once again. The Jester is an amazing support class, and he can be a raw, heavy damage dealer in Finale. I would say his average damage is a little low, but he's got some really nice bleed DOT depending on if you pick Harvest or Slice Off. He definitely works against a lot of boss lineups because, as I said, more speed, more critical, and more accuracy reduces your chance to miss. And then obviously those sweet criticals of just massive damage. Therefore, as I said again, he is just great against most bosses. What I will say his cons are his resistances actually aren't that high anywhere. So 140% is often a 50% chance, if not a little higher. Therefore, he's very susceptible to status affliction stuff, such as, stuns, blights, and bleeds. However, he's got a natural dodge of 35, and if you put any trinkets on him and have other light benefits, that could easily be 50 to 55, which is incredibly tough to hit, which is a pro for him again. His HP is also kind of low at 35, and you have to watch how many times he gets hit. Also, he has to be in the 3rd position, I think, for his most effectiveness, so that can sometimes ruin a party lineup depending on where you like your individuals. I think the Jester is just absolutely a crucial character, and I don't think you should neglect Jesters in your lineups in Darkest Dungeon. They make your life easier through stress heals, enabling your weaker damage dealers to do a lot of damage, and he can pull his own weight depending on the situation. Let me know what you think of the Jester and his beautiful tunes and his slicing abilities. Thanks for watching, and stick around.